The restaurant had a way of making people forget themselves. Low ceilings pressed down just enough to make whispers feel dangerous. Candlelight slid across black marble like oil, softening sharp faces and sharpening cruel ones. The kind of place where the menus had no prices and the smiles were rehearsed. Power didn't announce itself here. It leaned back, crossed its legs, and waited to be served. She arrived without hurry. When the Mafia lady boss stepped inside, the room reacted before she did. Chairs shifted. Conversations thinned. A violinist missed half a note and recovered too late. Fear moved faster than recognition, and recognition arrived like an aftershock. She wore ivory silk, tailored close to the body, the color deliberate, clean, untouchable, impossible to stain. Her hair was pinned with precision, not a strand out of place, not because she feared disorder, but because disorder feared her. No one greeted her by name. They didn't have to. The way people straightened told her everything she needed to know. She took the central table, the one unofficially reserved for those who could afford consequences. Her entourage spread out naturally, not blocking the room, just owning it. One man stood behind her chair, thick-necked, eyes flat. Another leaned against the column near the wine wall, pretending to scroll his phone while memorizing every face. A third sat 2 tables away, back to the room, reflection captured perfectly in the mirrored panel behind the bar. She hadn't said a word yet, and already the balance had shifted. The waiter assigned to her section noticed all of it. He noticed the way the manager's smile cracked when her name was whispered, the way the kitchen went silent for a half-second too long, the way the bartender's hands trembled pouring water. He noticed because noticing was what had kept him alive before this life, before the apron, before the name stitched over his chest that wasn't really his. He approached her table the same way he approached all of them. Calm, measured, eyes down just enough to seem respectful, not enough to look afraid. "Good evening," he said. Neutral accent. Careful English. "Can I start you with something to drink?" She didn't look at him. She reached for her phone instead, scrolling lazily, as if he were part of the furniture. When she spoke, it wasn't to him. It was to the man behind her chair, and it wasn't in English. "Vist como caminan aquí?" she said softly in Spanish, lips barely moving. "Did you see how they walk here?" The man chuckled. "Como si les debiéramos algo, like we owe them something." She smiled, still not looking up. "Este cree que es invisible." This one thinks he's invisible. The waiter poured water. His hand didn't shake. She switched her legs, silk whispering against skin. "Miralo, tan cuidadoso. Seguro cree que si sonri lo sufficient. Alguien va a rescatarlo de esta vida." Look at him. So careful. He probably thinks if he smiles enough, someone will rescue him from this life. Laughter rippled at the table. Soft, amused, casual cruelty, delivered with the ease of habit. The waiter placed the glass down without a sound. Most people would have flinched. A twitch of the jaw, a tightening of the shoulders, some small betrayal of emotion. He gave her nothing, just a slight nod, professional, practiced. That was the first thing that bothered her, though she didn't realize it yet. She glanced up at him for the first time. Not directly, just enough to register his face. Ordinary. Too ordinary. Dark hair cut short. Clean shave. Brown eyes that didn't dart or beg. He looked like someone who had learned how not to be noticed. She leaned back in her chair. "Sabes que es lo peor?" she continued, still in Spanish. "Do you know what the worst part is?" The man behind her shrugged. "Dime. Que no entiende nada. That he understands nothing." Her eyes flicked to the waiter now openly. Measuring. Testing. "Pobrecito," she added. "Poor thing." The word landed heavy. Designed to bruise. The waiter asked for her order. His tone didn't change. He didn't rush her. He didn't slow down. Just stood there, patient, pen ready, like time itself worked for him. Around them, the restaurant resumed its low hum, but the energy had shifted. A few servers avoided the section entirely. One of the younger waitresses pretended to polish cutlery nearby, close enough to hear, too afraid to leave. This place was neutral ground. Everyone knew that. Deals were hinted at, never signed. Threats were implied, never spoken. Violence stayed outside the doors. Language, however, was fair game. Language cut deeper when no one thought you understood it. The lady boss knew this. She had built half her reputation on it. She ordered slowly, deliberately complicating the process. Changes. Substitutions. A rare wine that wasn't on the menu anymore but that she knew they still had. Each request a reminder of who bent for whom. As she spoke, she continued in Spanish, peppering her words with regional slang, the kind that separated native speakers from tourists. Insults slipped in between requests, wrapped in jokes, disguised as observations. Este tipo no ha salido nunca de su barrio, she murmured. This guy's never left his neighborhood. Seguro vive con cinco primos en un apartamento, another man added. Probably lives with 5 cousins in one apartment. They laughed again. The waiter wrote everything down. Perfect handwriting. No crossed-out words. One of the bodyguards near the column watched him more closely now. Not because of the insults. Because of the stillness. Because the waiter's breathing never changed. Because his eyes, when they lifted, didn't look confused. They looked focused. The lady boss noticed the bodyguard noticing. That irritated her more than the waiter ever could have. She leaned forward, resting her elbows on the table. Dime, she said, switching briefly to English. Eyes locked on the waiter now. Are you even following me? Yes, ma'am, he replied. Simple, polite. She smiled thinly, then slipped back into Spanish like a blade returning to its sheath. Miente bien. He lies well. Her tone sharpened. Apuesto a que ni siquiera sabe de donde viene este vino. I bet he doesn't even know where this wine comes from. The waiter paused, just for a fraction of a second. Not long enough to be called hesitation. Long enough to be deliberate. It's from Ribera del Duero, he said in English, still calm. The producer moved the harvest up last year because of the heat. She froze. Not visibly. Not dramatically. Just a microscopic tightening around the eyes. The kind only people who lived by reading others noticed. She tilted her head. And how would you know that? He met her gaze now. Fully. Respectfully. No challenge. No fear. I pay attention, he said. Something passed between them then. Not anger. Not recognition. A question. She laughed it off, waving a dismissive hand, switching back to Spanish again. Louder this time, for the table to hear. Mira eso. Tenemos un sommelier escondido. Look at that. We've got a hidden sommelier. But the laughter that followed was thinner. Forced. The waiter excused himself and walked away, posture unchanged. As he disappeared into the kitchen, the bodyguard by the column continued to watch him until the swinging doors closed. Lo no taste? The bodyguard murmured quietly to her. Did you notice? She took a sip of water. Note que habla más de lo que debería. I noticed he talks more than he should. No, the man said. Note que no te tuvo miedo. Her fingers tightened around the glass. Across the room, unseen, the waiter leaned against the stainless steel counter for exactly 3 seconds. Long enough to exhale. Not because he was shaken. Because restraint took effort. Because every insult had landed, catalogued, filed away with others just like it. He wasn't here by accident. He hadn't taken this job because he needed tips. He was here because places like this attracted people like her. And people like her always forgot one thing. Uniforms lie. Power loves to believe it's alone at the top. It loves to believe everyone below is there by accident, by stupidity, by weakness. The lady boss lifted her chin, scanning the room, reasserting herself through posture alone. The waiter returned moments later with bread, placing it down with the same careful grace. Their eyes met again. Neither smiled. And somewhere between the candlelight and the silence, a question settled into the air, unspoken but heavy enough to bend the night around it. Why hadn't he flinched? And why, for the first time in a very long while, did she feel like the room was no longer entirely hers? The tension didn't arrive all at once. It seeped in, slow and deliberate, like a stain spreading under white silk. The lady boss let the first exchange sit for a while. She ate. She drank. She allowed conversation to drift to business matters spoken in careful half-sentences and coded jokes. But her eyes followed the waiter whenever he crossed the room. Not openly. Never obviously. Just enough to keep him within her peripheral vision. Like a loose thread she hadn't decided whether to pull. The waiter felt it. He felt it in the way his shoulders stayed loose but ready. In the way his breathing stayed measured even as his pulse picked up. He'd been watched before, by worse men in worse rooms, but there was something about this kind of attention that gnawed deeper. It wasn't predatory. It was performative. She wasn't deciding whether to destroy him. She was deciding how. She called him back for wine service. He approached with the bottle wrapped in linen, posture perfect. As he tilted the label toward her, she leaned in just enough to smell the faint soap on his skin. Clean. Cheap. Lavender, maybe. She smiled. Sabes, she said casually in Spanish. ¿Qué en mi barrio? Alguien como tú no duraría en I una semana? You know that in my neighborhood, someone like you wouldn't last a week. He uncorked the bottle smoothly. No tremor. No slip. That's good to know, he replied in English. She waved him off with a lazy flick of her fingers. No. Quédate. Stay. He stayed. Her crew quieted instinctively. This was familiar territory for them. This was how she reminded people where they stood. She never shouted. Never threatened. She carved. She switched dialects mid-sentence, sliding into a faster, more regional Spanish, the kind shaped by alleyways and backrooms, not classrooms. Seguro cruzó la frontera con zapatos prestados, she said, lips curling. Probably crossed the border in borrowed shoes. One of the men laughed too loudly. Another glanced around, enjoying the performance. Why ahora mira, she continued. And now look. Serviendo mesas. Creyendo que aquí es alguien. Serving tables, thinking he's someone here. The waiter poured the wine. The deep red liquid caught the light like blood. Inside him something tightened. Not rage. Memory. He remembered another room. Another woman laughing in the same language while men with guns checked the exits. He remembered standing still then too, translating words that sealed fates. He remembered learning that silence was sometimes louder than any response. Still, his jaw set just a fraction tighter this time. She noticed. Her eyes flicked to his face, sharp as a blade catching light. Te molesta? Does it bother you? No, ma'am, he said. Mentiroso, she murmured. Liar. She lifted the glass, sniffed, took a sip, then grimaced theatrically. Está abierto. It's opened. He inclined his head. The bottle was sealed. She leaned back, crossing her arms. No, en mi opinion. Not in my opinion. It wasn't about the wine. It never was. Tres otro, she ordered. Y esta vez no lo ruins. As he turned to leave, she added softly, almost kindly, "Ay es como empiezan los errors." This is how mistakes begin. He walked away. The kitchen doors swung shut behind him, and for a moment the noise of plates and pans swallowed the room. He stood there longer than necessary, staring at the rack of glasses, grounding himself. He rolled his shoulders once, subtle, resetting his body like a fighter between rounds. When he returned with a new bottle, the dynamic had shifted again. A woman at a nearby table, expensive dress, understated jewelry, was watching now. Not amused, curious. Her accent when she spoke quietly to her companion carried the faint rhythm of Madrid. She understood. She'd understood everything. The lady boss didn't miss that either. She decided to escalate. Ven, she said, tapping the table. Come. He stepped closer. Close enough now that the space between them felt intentional. She lowered her voice. Spanish again. Slower this time. More precise. Dime algo, she said. Tell me something. De qué part Eries? Where are you from? He hesitated. A heartbeat. Too long. California, he answered in English. She smiled. A shark's smile. Claro. Of course. Then, casually, Porque ese acento no es mexicano. Because that accent isn't Mexican. One of the men frowned. Another leaned in. The waiter felt the trap snap into place. He could hear it. She wasn't testing whether he understood anymore. She was testing how much. I move around, he said. She laughed, light and musical. Miralo. Misterioso. Look at him. Mysterious. Then she switched again, dropping into an even narrower dialect. Words clipped, phrasing sharp. The kind of Spanish used in one city in one generation, among people who assumed outsiders wouldn't follow. Este chico ese cree listo, she said. This boy thinks he's clever. Pero no sabe ni conjugar bien los tiempos. But he doesn't even know how to conjugate properly. The woman at the nearby table stiffened. Her eyes widened just a touch. The waiter's fingers curled slightly around the bottle. He almost spoke then. Almost. He felt the words rise, precise and devastating, lining themselves up in his mind. He knew exactly which mistake she'd made, exactly how to correct it, exactly how to do it without insulting her, which would make it worse. He swallowed. Silence stretched. The lady boss leaned forward. "Kay?" she prompted. "What?" "Nothing." She smiled again, satisfied, and waved him away with a flick of her wrist. "De jolo. Ya entendi. Leave it. I understand." But she hadn't won. Not fully. The room felt different now. Thicker. Like the air before a storm. She spoke louder, addressing the table, her crew, the room. "Es gracioso," she said. "It's funny. La gente cree que el idioma es poder." People think language is power. She turned her head slightly, eyes never leaving the waiter. "Pero el poder real no necesita entender." But real power doesn't need to understand. That did it. The waiter stopped. Not dramatically. He simply didn't take another step. The room noticed before she did. He turned back slowly, facing her fully now. His posture was unchanged, but something in his presence sharpened, like a blade finally drawn from its sheath. "Con respeto," he said. Her eyebrow arched. "Que dijiste? What did you say?" He answered her in Spanish. Not the Spanish she'd been using. Not the rough-edged slang. Something cleaner, older, controlled. Each word placed carefully like pieces on a chessboard. "Con respeto," he repeated. "El verbo que uso está mal conjugado." With respect, the verb you used is incorrectly conjugated. The sound of the room dying was almost audible. One of the men at her table froze mid-sip. The woman nearby inhaled sharply. He continued, voice calm, polite, almost gentle. "En ese contexto, debería ser preterito imperfecto, no indefinido." In that context, it should be imperfect past, not simple past. He paused, just long enough to let it sink in. "And that dialect," he added, still respectful, "is from the south side of the city, late 90s. You're mixing it with phrasing from another region. It changes the meaning." Silence detonated. Not a single laugh followed. Not a clink of glass. Not a breath. The lady boss stared at him. For the first time since she'd entered the restaurant, she didn't have a line ready. Her mouth opened slightly, then closed. Her fingers tightened against the edge of the table. He met her gaze without defiance, without apology. "I'm sorry if I misunderstood," he finished softly. "I just wanted to be precise." No one moved. The power in the room shifted. Not loudly, not violently, but unmistakably. Like a throne cracking, not collapsing yet, but no longer solid. And in that quiet, devastating pause, everyone understood the same thing at once. The humiliation had changed direction. For half a second, the lady boss looked like a woman who had misstepped on a staircase she'd climbed 1,000 times. Then she laughed. It was quick, bright, perfectly timed. The kind of laugh that signaled amusement, not surprise. The kind that told the room everything was still under control. "Ah," she said, clapping her hands lightly once. "Miralo. Tenemos un profesor. Look at him. We have a professor." A few of her men chuckled on cue. Too late. Too loud. The sound didn't travel the way laughter should. It fell flat, sliding off the silence instead of cutting through it. She leaned back, eyes never leaving the waiter. "Está bien," she continued, still smiling. "Gracias por la clase." "Thank you for the lesson." He inclined his head slightly. "Siempre," he replied. "Always." The woman at the nearby table lowered her glass slowly, careful not to make a sound. A man across the room pretended to check his phone while angling it just enough to catch the reflection of the lady boss's face. Even the bartender had stopped wiping the counter. The lady boss felt it then. Not the loss of power, she wasn't ready to accept that, but the resistance. The room had stopped moving with her. It was subtle, almost imperceptible, but she'd built an empire on noticing shifts exactly like this. She straightened, spine aligning, reclaiming height even while seated. "Vamos a calmarnos," she said lightly. "Let's calm down. Es solo un idioma. It's just a language." She switched again, this time into a smoother, more neutral Spanish, the kind used in boardrooms and interviews. Safe, polished. "No todos nacemos con las mismas oportunidades," she said. "Not all of us are born with the same opportunities." It sounded generous, almost kind. The waiter listened, hands folded loosely in front of him. He didn't interrupt, didn't correct her, didn't smile. She gestured toward him with her glass. "Pero mirate," she continued. "But look at you. Aquí estás, trabajando duro. Here you are, working hard." A few nods from her crew. Approval. The narrative was resetting. She was the benefactor now, the magnanimous one. He waited until she finished. "See," he said simply. "Yes." Just one word. Calm. Neutral. She blinked. She hadn't expected agreement. She'd expected gratitude, or resentment, or embarrassment, something she could use. Instead, she got a mirror. She tilted her head, studying him again, more openly now. "Why donde aprendiste así?" she asked. "And where did you learn like that?" "Escuchando," he replied. Listening. Another pause. Another ripple through the room. She smiled again, tighter this time. "Bueno," she said. "Entonces escucha esto." She leaned in, lowering her voice, choosing her words carefully. She shifted dialect again, subtly, into something coastal, educated, carrying the rhythm of privilege rather than the grit of the streets. "Hay gente que nace para mandar," she said. "There are people who are born to command. Why hay gente que nace para server?" Serve. The word hung there, deliberate. The waiter met her gaze. "Eso depende," he said. "That depends." "On what?" Her eyes demanded. He answered without being asked. "De quien está mirando?" On who's watching? The bartender's hand froze mid-pour. Someone near the entrance inhaled sharply. The lady boss's laugh came again, but this time it was slower, calculated. She waved a hand as if brushing away something insignificant. "Ya basta," she said. "Enough. Vuelve a tu trabajo. Go back to your work." He didn't move, not in defiance. In compliance delayed just long enough to feel intentional. "Yes, ma'am," he said in English this time. He turned and walked away. Behind him, the room exhaled. Conversations tried to restart, but they came back uneven, fragmented. A joke fell flat. A toast went unanswered. The energy no longer flowed toward her table automatically. It splintered, people glancing at her. Then at the empty space where the waiter had been standing. She took another sip of wine. Tasted wrong now. "¿Qué fue eso?" one of her men murmured. "What was that?" "Nada," she said quickly. "Nothing. Un mesero con suerte. A lucky waiter." But she didn't believe it. And worse, neither did they. Minutes passed. Plates were cleared. New courses arrived. She spoke louder than necessary, reclaiming attention through volume and movement. But it felt forced now, like a performance she hadn't rehearsed enough. The waiter reappeared only when required. Always professional. Always distant. Never lingering. Never engaging unless spoken to. And when he did speak, it was neutral, precise, stripped of anything she could grab onto. She tried again, casually, as if the earlier exchange had never happened. ¿Cómo te llamas? She asked in Spanish. What's your name? He paused, just long enough to feel deliberate again. Daniel, he said. It wasn't his real name. She repeated it, testing the sound. Daniel. Then, smoothly, no suena muy local. Doesn't sound very local. No lo es, he replied. It isn't. She waited for more. Nothing came. The woman at the nearby table smiled faintly into her glass. The lady boss felt heat crawl up her neck. She hated that. Hated when her emotions threatened to surface where others could see them. She leaned back and switched languages again, this time to English, projecting confidence. You know, she said, addressing the table loudly. People think intelligence is rare. It isn't. Discipline is. A few nods. Safer ground. She turned her head slightly, eyes cutting toward the waiter without fully facing him. Some people confused the two. He was already gone, slipping into the kitchen like smoke. That, more than anything, unsettled her. She hadn't dismissed him. She hadn't finished with him. Yet he had removed himself from her orbit without asking permission. Power didn't like that. In the kitchen, the waiter rinsed his hands under cold water, grounding himself again. He stared at his reflection in the steel for a moment longer than necessary. He knew what he'd done. He'd nudged the balance. Not enough to topple it. Just enough to make it wobble. The dangerous part wasn't that she'd been corrected. It was that everyone else had heard it. Back in the dining room, a man at the bar leaned toward his companion. ¿Escuchaste eso? Did you hear that? His companion nodded slowly. Sí. Yes. The lady boss caught the exchange out of the corner of her eye. Her jaw tightened. She smiled again, raised her glass and made a toast. Loud. Commanding. The room responded slowly, reluctantly, but it did respond. Yet even as glasses clinked, attention drifted. People weren't watching her anymore. They were listening. Listening for footsteps. Listening for the waiter's voice. Listening for what might happen next. She felt it then, unmistakable and cold. She hadn't lost power because he spoke back. She'd lost it because the room had decided he was worth hearing. The kitchen was louder than the dining room, but it felt safer. Noise could be ignored. Silence demanded answers. The waiter stood near the prep table, drying the same glass twice without noticing. His reflection warped across the steel surface, fractured by dents and scratches earned over years of use. For a moment, he didn't see the restaurant anymore. He saw another room. Hotter. Smaller. No windows. Back then, the walls had been concrete. The table plastic. The men impatient. He had been younger. Thinner. His hands had shaken then, not from fear, but from the weight of what words could do when spoken in the wrong order. Despacio, one of them had said. Slowly. He'd translated deals that moved trucks across borders and bodies into graves. He'd learned early that language wasn't just communication. It was camouflage. A single misplaced phrase could turn a negotiation into an execution. Precision wasn't academic. It was survival. He'd been good at it. Too good. They called him in whenever things got complicated. When tempers flared. When egos collided. He learned every dialect he needed, not from books, but from listening. From watching mouths move when people lied. From noticing which words men chose when they thought they were safe. He'd thought being indispensable made him protected. Didn't. The night it all burned down, he hadn't even been in the room. He'd been sent home early. A reward, they'd said. Go rest. We'll finish this. By morning, half of them were dead. The other half were looking for someone to blame. Translators make convenient scapegoats. Words are easy to twist when the speaker isn't around to defend them. He'd run that same day. Left behind a name that now existed only on documents that mattered to dangerous people. He'd crossed borders the quiet way, the kind that didn't stamp passports. He learned how to disappear by watching others fail to. This restaurant wasn't random. Places like this were magnets. Neutral ground attracted predators who believed the rules protected them. It was the safest place to hide because it was the last place anyone expected him to be watching. In the dining room, The lady boss felt the absence like an itch she couldn't scratch. She pretended not to notice the waiter's prolonged absence, but her eyes tracked every movement toward the kitchen doors. Her men spoke around her, voices blending into a dull hum. She nodded at the right moments, smiled when expected, but her attention was elsewhere. She replayed the exchange in her head, searching for the fracture. The exact second things shifted. It wasn't the correction. She'd been corrected before. Quietly, privately. That hadn't mattered. This had. Because it was public. Because it was clean. Because he hadn't tried to win. That was what unsettled her most. She'd built her reputation on humiliation. On the understanding that fear traveled faster when dressed as wit. Language had always been her sharpest blade. You could insult someone in front of their peers and leave no bruise to point at later. But tonight her blade had slipped. She studied the faces around her table now, reading them the way she always did. Loyal, amused, curious. But beneath it something else. Calculation. They were recalibrating. She hated that. She leaned toward the man behind her chair. Averigua quien es, she murmured. Find out who he is. The man nodded once and slipped away, already dialing a number. She turned back to her wine, swirling it slowly. Interessante, she said to no one in particular. Interesting. Across the room, the woman from Madrid excused herself and walked toward the restroom, passing the kitchen doors on purpose. As she did, she glanced inside. She saw the waiter standing very still, eyes closed, palms flat against the counter, grounding himself. She understood then. Her lips pressed together. She returned to her table without a word. Minutes later, the waiter was summoned. Not by name. Not loudly. The manager approached him, face pale, voice low. She'd like to speak with you, he said. Privately. The waiter met his eyes. The manager looked away. He nodded once. Of course. As he walked back into the dining room, conversations thinned again. Heads turned, subtle and unmistakable. This time, no one pretended not to watch. The lady boss rose from her seat as he approached, smoothing her jacket. She smiled, gracious now, every inch the hostess. Vamos, she said lightly, gesturing toward a side corridor. Come. They walked side by side, neither rushing. Her heels clicked softly against the floor. His steps made no sound at all. The private room was small, windowless, designed for conversations that didn't need witnesses. The door closed behind them with a soft, final sound. For the first time all night, she dropped the smile. She studied him openly now, head to toe, taking inventory. The stillness, the control, the way he stood as if the room belonged to neither of them. Daniel, she said. The name tasted false. He didn't correct her. You know, she continued, switching back to Spanish. La mayoría de la gente se quiebra mucho antes. Most people break much earlier. Tal vez, he said. Maybe. She laughed quietly. No eres mesero, she said. You're not a waiter. No, he agreed. The admission hung between them. She stepped closer, invading his space deliberately. Entonces dime, she said softly. Then tell me. Quien eres? He met her gaze. For the first time, there was no politeness there. Just truth, measured and restrained. Alguien que ya perdió todo una vez, he said. Someone who already lost everything once. Her eyes narrowed. Pieces slid into place. The accent, the restraint, the way he'd listen more than he spoke. And you're hiding, she said. Yes. She exhaled slowly. Not in relief. In understanding. Eso te hace peligroso, she said. That makes you dangerous. He shrugged slightly. Solo es mi obligan. Only if I'm forced. She stared at him for a long moment, then smiled again. But this time it didn't reach her eyes. She realized something then, cold and precise. He could ruin her without raising his voice, without threatening her, without even meaning to. All it would take was the right word in the right ear. And she, for the first time in years, wasn't sure whether she wanted to destroy him or keep him very, very close. The door closed softly behind them, and with it went the noise, the witnesses, the safety of performance. The private room felt smaller than it was, the air heavier, as if the walls themselves were listening. She didn't sit. Neither did he. For a moment, they stood facing each other in silence. Two people who understood that the next word spoken would decide far more than the evening. She broke it first. "Sabes que podría matarte," she said calmly. "You know I could kill you." No flourish. No anger. Just a statement of fact, delivered the way one might comment on the weather. He nodded once. "See." That annoyed her more than fear ever could. "You humiliated me," she continued, voice low but steady. "Delante de mi gente. In front of my people." "No," he said gently. "Usted ese humiló sola." Her jaw tightened. "Cuidado." "I'm being careful," he replied. "That's why I'm still alive." She stepped closer, close enough that he could smell her perfume. Expensive, restrained, chosen to suggest control rather than seduction. "Una palabra mía," she whispered. "Why no sales de este edificio?" "También lo sabe," he said. "Que una palabra mía podría costar más que esta mesa." "You also know that one word from me could cost you more than this table." Her eyes flashed. "¿Me estás amenazando?" "No," he said. "Lo estoy explicando." Silence stretched again, thicker now. Dangerous. She circled him slowly, heels clicking softly against the floor, predator and queen, examining her opponent from every angle. "Hablas como alguien que estuvo dentro," she said. "You speak like someone who was inside." He didn't answer. "You know aprendiste eso sirviendo vino," she pressed. "You didn't learn that serving wine." "No." "Entonces dime," she said, stopping directly in front of him. "Para quien trabajaste?" He considered her for a moment, then shook his head. "Eso no importa." "Para mí sí," she snapped. He met her gaze, unwavering. "Ahí está su primer error." She stiffened. "Cool. Creer que todo gira alrededor de usted," he said quietly. "Believing everything revolves around you." The words landed harder than any insult. She laughed, sharp and humorless. "He construido imperios," she said. "I've built empires." "Sobre mito prestado," he replied. "On borrowed fear." Her hand twitched at her side. Not toward a weapon, toward control. "You usas el idioma como latigo," he continued, still calm. "You use language like a whip. Funciona mientras nadie lo agarra." It works as long as no one grabs it. She stared at him. "Y tú que sabes de control?" He hesitated then, just for a fraction of a second. Not fear. "Wait. Say lo que cuesta," he said. "I know what it costs." Her voice dropped. "Que perdiste?" Everything he didn't say answered her. She inhaled slowly. The room felt warmer now. Or maybe it was just the narrowing of possibilities. "You sabes cosas," she said. "You know things." "Yes." "Cuánto?" "Sufficient." She stepped back, reassessing. This wasn't a waiter. This wasn't even just a survivor. This was someone who had once been close enough to see the machinery from the inside. "Dime algo," she said, softer now. "Tell me something." "Por qué aquí?" He looked around the room, then back at her. "Por qué lugares como este atraen a personas como usted?" "Because places like this attract people like you." "And people like me," she prompted. "Siempre creen que están a salvo," he finished. Her lips pressed together. "You sabía," she said slowly. "You knew I would be here." "I hoped. And if I hadn't been, I would have kept listening." She laughed again, but this time there was something almost genuine in it. "Eres paciente. Aprendí a serlo," he said. "La gente impatient muy rápido." Her smile faded. She stopped pacing and faced him squarely. "Voy a ser clara," she said. "I'll be clear. Puedo desaparecer. I can make you disappear." "Yes." "Puedo hacer que nadie haga preguntas." "Yes." "Why on así estás aquí?" she said, voice sharpening. "Hablando como si fueras igual." "No," he said. "Lo hablo como alguien que entiende." She searched his face, looking for the crack, the desperation, the plea. There was none. Dime tu nombre real, she demanded. He shook his head. No. Entonces no hay trato, she snapped. I never offered one, he replied. The tension coiled tight, ready to snap. She reached into her jacket slowly, deliberately. His body shifted instantly, not aggressive, just prepared. He'd noticed the movement before she'd finished it. She paused, watching him notice. That, more than anything, told her what she needed to know. She withdrew her hand. Empty. You no tienes miedo, she said quietly. You're not afraid. Si tengo, he said. Pero no de usted. That stung. Entonces. Decay? She asked. De volver a ser invisible, he said. Of becoming invisible again. Something flickered in her expression then. Recognition. The briefest crack in the armor. She looked away first. The room seemed to breathe with them. You sabes como terminaría esto, she said finally. You know how this usually ends. Yes, he said. Por eso estoy cuidando cada palabra. She studied him for a long moment. Then, slowly, deliberately, she sat down. An invitation. Or a concession. Te subestime, she said at last. I underestimated you. He didn't respond. She looked up at him. Eso no pasa seguido. I can imagine. She exhaled, leaning back, eyes never leaving his. Puedo protegerute, she said. I can protect you. I'm not asking for protection. I can destroy it, she countered. I know. The balance hung there, perfectly centered, trembling. For the first time in years, surrounded by power, money, and men who would kill on her word, she wasn't sure who was in control. And that uncertainty scared her more than any threat ever had. When they left the private room, they didn't walk out together. She exited first, posture restored, expression composed, the faint smile of a woman who had decided something important and didn't intend to explain it. A few seconds later, the waiter followed, quiet as ever, slipping back into the rhythm of the restaurant as if nothing unusual had occurred. But everything had changed. The lady boss returned to her table and sat with a different energy. Not weaker, not smaller, just recalibrated. Her voice lowered instead of rising. Her gestures became economical. She stopped performing power and began conserving it. Her crew noticed immediately. They always did. The loud one spoke less. The eager one watched her face before laughing. The older one, the one who had survived long enough to understand real shifts, studied her with narrowed eyes, then let his gaze drift, just once, toward the waiter clearing plates at the edge of the room. No one said anything. They didn't need to. The lady boss lifted her glass and spoke again, Spanish rolling off her tongue, but the edge was gone. No mockery, no barbs, just language doing what it was meant to do, connect, not cut. Este lugar es bueno, she said. This place is good. It sounded like praise. It sounded like approval. The manager exhaled a breath he didn't realize he'd been holding. Dinner continued. Time passed. The room settled into something like normalcy, though the undercurrent never fully disappeared. Conversations flowed, laughter returned, but it carried a different tone now. Softer, more cautious. People were listening more than speaking. The waiter moved through it all unnoticed, which was exactly how he preferred it. He poured wine. He cleared plates. He nodded politely when spoken to. Nothing about his behavior invited attention. Yet attention found him anyway. The lady boss didn't look at him directly again. Not once. But she adjusted around him. When she spoke Spanish now, she chose neutral phrasing. Clean grammar. No regional hooks. No weapons hidden in jokes. When someone else slipped into cruelty, an offhand remark about a server, a lazy insult, she shut it down with a look or a raised finger. Subtle. Immediate. Her people followed her lead. Power didn't leave her. It shifted shape. Near the end of the evening, a younger waiter, new, nervous, eager to please, spilled a few drops of water while refilling a glass at the edge of her table. It wasn't much, barely noticeable, but the boy froze anyway. He'd seen how nights like this could turn. One of the men snorted. ¿Qué te pasa? What's wrong with you? The boy stammered an apology, cheeks burning. The lady boss looked up. For a fraction of a second, the room held its breath, expecting the familiar sting, the humiliation, the reminder. Instead, she spoke calmly, clearly in Spanish. Tranquilo, she said. Easy. No pasa nada. It's nothing. She took the napkin herself and dabbed the spill. The gesture was small, almost invisible, but the effect was seismic. The boy blinked, unsure he'd heard correctly. Gracias, he whispered. She nodded once. Sigu con tu trabajo. Keep doing your job. He did. Across the room, unseen by her, the original waiter paused in his work. Just for a moment. Long enough to register the shift. No smile touched his face. There was nothing to celebrate. This was how real consequences worked. Quiet, unremarkable to outsiders, permanent to those who understood. The lady boss finished her drink, stood, and prepared to leave. Her crew rose with her, forming the familiar protective shape. As she walked toward the exit, she stopped briefly near the bar. She didn't turn. Buenas noches, she said in Spanish. Good night. Not to anyone in particular. The waiter inclined his head slightly from where he stood, shadowed by shelves and glass. She left. The restaurant exhaled again, deeper this time. Chairs scraped softly. Conversations resumed without tension. The night reclaimed itself. Later, much later, when the lights dimmed and the last table was cleared, the waiter washed his hands at the sink and watched the water run clear. No one asked him questions. No one needed to. Power had spoken. Not loudly. Not violently. She had used Spanish to humiliate him. He had used silence to humble her. Power doesn't always shout. Sometimes it waits and lets arrogance speak first. Would you have stayed silent or spoken back?